Welcome to the Help and Hope podcast. I'm Sharon Betters, your host, and we are so excited today to talk about a topic that is often really difficult. It's hidden sometimes, and it's mental illness. And our guest today is Christopher Cook, who has a podcast called WinToday, where he has over 400 conversations with people, experts, talking about mental illness. So you know he is passionate about this topic. He has also written a book called Healing What You Can't Erase. And friends, I'm praying that this conversation will be like salty peanuts. You'll listen and you'll want to know more, and you will go out and get this book. So Christopher, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you're crazy busy, and I'm so excited about introducing you to the people who are listening to this, watching this podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sharon.
Christopher, you have written a book, as I said, called Healing What You Can't Erase. And it's just mind-boggling to me that you have over 400 interviews on mental health with mental health experts and conversations about this really hard place that so many people experience. Why are you so passionate about this?
We are undoubtedly in a worldwide mental health crisis as we speak. And yet the self-help industry, Sharon, continues to respond with feel-good promises it simply cannot deliver. And as such, it leaves people stuck in regret and despair and confusion. We have everything at our fingertips to better our lives, if you will, and yet nothing is really changing for the better. People continue to seek out help. People apparently run in circles. It's like spinning our wheels in the mud, so to speak. The self, if you will, this is the narrative of the self-creation, self-healing message. The self has become the bronze statue of this era. Look inside yourself to find your true self. Find hope and healing inside yourself. Yet I look at the Psalms. I look at Psalm 121, for example. I look up, I look up, I look out. So my help is not found down and in, but rather up and out to King Jesus. And in a way, we are obsessed, as I said, with self-creation, with self-help. And we need a solution beyond ourselves if we want transformation that is both systemic and lasting. I think it's worth repeating that for our friends joined with us today. We need a solution beyond ourselves if we want not simply healing, but transformation that is both systemic and lasting. Because for a lot of people, Sharon, this was my story, life is moving forward, but they are not. And that really is the passion point that drives my work today.
That's really, I love that last statement. Life is moving forward, but that hurting, wounded person is not. And one of the things that you said, that I thought was really helpful, you say, because of unexposed and unhealed wounds, we unintentionally normalize mindsets and behaviors that are anything but normal. And I think you just said that, we're not moving forward. But what do you mean when you say that? Can you give us some examples of behavior that, because we're not addressing those wounds, maybe they're just too hard. It's just too hard to address them. So we put it, bury them, but our behavior, that is impacting our behavior. And we feel that's normal behavior. What would be some of those things that would feel like normal, but they're not really?
Well, I think it actually exposes a deeper issue. And if I can get sort of to the issue behind the issue, what happens is when we have unresolved disappointment and ungrieved losses, it eventually gets into the subconscious and breaks our spirit, as I talk about in the book. And when we don't deal with these deep, painful, real issues, we end up living through the narrative that they write, and they become as normal as Tuesday. We no longer can distinguish trauma from Tuesday. We wake up and there's this unrelenting sense of just defeat and despair. And after a while, because we've lived with that condition for so long, we think, that's just me. It's just me. And so life isn't about moving forward, as in Paul's language, more than a conqueror. Instead, we are living a reactive response to life from the position of self-protection because the pain of adversity is too great. So we live this self-protected, insulated life where, as I said, we're not moving forward. We are mitigating against future pain. So we create these really small, safe, stuck lives, thinking that we can essentially wrap our arms around life to prevent future pain. But like, that's just such a misnomer in and of itself. So to answer your specific question, like, what do? We insulate our lives. We isolate ourselves. We try to create really small lives. We numb out on scrolling and social media and pornography and surface relationships. We reduce our lives to what we consider to be manageable. But that's no way to live.
I'm thinking about, I mean, even in my own life, some of the wounds, the experiences that I've had. My husband was a pastor for 50 years and church life and, you know, the relationships and everybody has those networks of relationships. And I'm thinking about some of the things that I've probably buried because I didn't know how to resolve them that lead to exactly what you're saying. You know, the isolation of building up walls to make sure that I don't get hurt again. And yet, as you're saying, we live in a broken world. Jesus promised we are going to have trouble. But then he says, but don't be afraid because I've overcome the world. And so that I can see that I'm thinking about that normalization of how a person would react to opportunities, to new relationships. The isolation that you mentioned, you had talked about that in your own life, where because of the pain that you had experienced, and you share the story in your book of your mother who was diagnosed with terminal cancer and your care of her, and then that she was not able to overcome the cancer and the impact that had on you as a young man. And talk to us a little bit about how old were you when that happened, and how did that impact the way that you lived your life? I think I remember you talking about you just kept walking. You did what you had to do, kept your head down, kind of thing. Were isolated. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Sure. Her diagnosis came in 1994. I was 11 years old, and we battled as a family with her for 18 and a half years. So until that point, it was the majority of my life. So the first part of your question asked, like, what is this reality? What is the lens that it creates, essentially? Well, when you live through a traumatic lens, it creates a disposition by which you say, oh, this is normal. This is my normal life. Even though, listen, as you said, adversity hits us all. But after 18 years, it just creates a disposition of an identity that is forged by adversity, and it's just hard. So how did I cope against that? I will say it didn't cause me to isolate at all through my upbringing. Isolation came in where after my MS diagnosis, 9 months after her passing, I said, I can't take the pain anymore. So I did my best to shrink my life. As I spoke about moments ago, I shrank my life in such a way in an effort to somehow keep control of the life that was spinning hopelessly out of control. That's where the isolation piece came in. Pain, adversity is loud. It does create a narrative, a lens, if you will. The metaphor mixes. Adversity is so loud that it challenges the validity of the promises we read in the scriptures, one of which is Hebrews 13, I will never leave you or forsake you. Yet adversity says, if that was true, where is he? This is where keeping and guarding the heart is so vital. Pain has a way of shaping our view on reality, and we just can't be defined by it. I expound upon that in great detail in the book, but it is to say that the adversity is real, the loss is real, but it just can't define us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about my own life again. Obviously, this is it can touch a nerve in many ways, but I think when you are hit, like you said, that was your reality for 18 years.
Sure, sure.
But then with that diagnosis of MS, I mean, that's just another huge blow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we only have so much bandwidth to be able to
Mm-hmm.
cope with all the other things in life.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to pick and choose. This is where I'm going to put my energy because I don't have the energy to deal with this thing over here. I don't have the energy to deal with more people in my life, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like this conflict of I need more people. I need people in my life, but I can't handle those people in my life. So you talked about a friend who, at a terribly critical point in your life, that friend was there for you and was there on a regular basis for you. What if you don't have a friend like that? What would you recommend? Because I think community is one of God's greatest gifts to
Mm-hmm.
us, that he
Mm-hmm.
keeps many of his promises through his people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's critical for us to have that one or two people in our lives. But what if somebody's listening right now who says, I have no one that can walk with me through this?
Yeah, we definitely heal in community. That's an important stakeholder principle to take hold of in this conversation. This is why being planted in a local church. So I hope we're speaking to probably the majority of listeners who are believers. This is why being planted in a local church is so vital. We heal in community, not in isolation. And so in this case, this is where a pastor steps in.
Mm-hmm.
This is also not to discount the value of the need for professional counseling too. Find a good professional Christian counselor to engage with you in the process of healing, because for many people, there are traumatic roots, and I really believe in professional help in that way.
Mm-hmm.
If there is intimidation about stepping out and asking for help, that is where I pray you will just take that RISK step of faith and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the day that you decide that the pain of regret is greater than the pain of making a change is the day you will take this first step to making a change. Because change is going to hurt.
Yeah.
Transformation is costly, but so is the pain of regret. And so it's like, which pain, pick your poison, so to speak. Which pain are you going to yield to?
I really appreciate your passion is for transformation from the inside out. And I really appreciate you saying this is not an easy decision. It's
No.
you're stepping into pain, but look at the pain you're in. Where do you want to live? Because the pain of transformation is going to lead to a place of peace and a place of purpose in your life. You talk about anxiety, and it was intriguing to me that you said, and again, correct me if I don't have it exactly right, but that the goal is not to get rid of the anxiety. Anxiety acts like a smoke alarm that's letting you know there's something wrong. There's a fire somewhere. And so anxiety, while it seems awful, can also be a pathway to healing. What do you mean by that? And then the second thing I would ask you is the path to transformation. You give a strategy to dealing with the roots of that anxiety, the seed strategy. So I really want you to talk about that too.
Sure. Let me spend some time on the first part of the question first. I'm not sure I really addressed that analogy specifically in the book regarding anxiety being an alarm, but that is really to credit the work of my good friend, Dr. John Deloney, who wrote the foreword to my book. He really has established this great metaphor for us that anxiety is like an alarm. Anxiety is an issue, but it's not the core issue in my experience. if anxiety, to your point, is like a smoke alarm, we have to find the source of the smoke and the fire itself. Like, it wouldn't serve us well when that alarm is beeping and the anxiety is ripping and roaring to rip the battery, so to speak, out of the alarm. We've got to go to the source. We have to find the smoke and the fire and address that. You have to heal the root of the issue. And in my case, it was healing the wounded, broken spirit. Now, how do we find the root? Well, this is, again, where we find it in the community of believers, in the presence of a spiritual director, a pastor, a therapist. Inner healing is very valuable for this work. And so, again, anxiety will lead us to the deeper issue, the source of it, the wounded cellular memory, the broken spirit, what have you.
Something you just said, I realized when you said, we'll pull out the batteries and throw them away because we're tired of the beeping.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the ways we do that with anxiety?
Yeah, this is where I think we numb out on busyness, workaholism, avoidance. As I said, scrolling, doom scrolling, Netflix, whatever your poison of choice is. We all numb out on something, and I think in a way that is equivalent to ripping the battery out of the alarm.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking of all those things that that even
because it's pain, right, Sharon? Right?
Yes.
Like addressing the root issue causes pain because we've got to revisit stuff, and people are like, "I've been through enough. I don't want to do this." This is why we numb out.
Yep.
When we numb out, we're not dealing with the core issues. We're saying, "I actually am most afraid of the pain and the discomfort."
Mm-hmm.
So I want to put a Band-Aid on it, and in so doing, what festers below the surface in the soul is underneath the hood. Yeah, it's the source of that, and it causes more systemic long-term damage to our ability to move forward when we don't heal the root.
I want to set up a little mini counseling situation for you, and it's the counselee is
who's
me.
Who's the counselor? Me?
You're the counselor,
okay,
and I'm the counselee. Let's put it that way. We lost our 16-year-old son Mark and his friend Kelly in a fatal car accident. It was 30 years ago, and yes, it is the worst pain that I've ever experienced, and so anyone would understand the depression that I experienced and the anxiety. When is the next shoe going to drop? When is the next phone call? Because I felt so violated by this horrific loss. And so I'm thinking about, I thought, okay, so as I was reading through, looking at your, and I mentioned it already, your seed strategy of how would you help me? I would come to you and say, I'm so deep in grief and depression. I don't know what reality is anymore. I'm anxious all the time. I mean, it's obvious I've lost my son. So those are all smoke alarms. But then I could see how your strategy could be so helpful for someone like me in that pathway. So talk to me about that. Explain to me that strategy and how I could take some steps. You don't have a long time with me, just some steps that would help me to start moving toward a more peaceful place.
Yeah, I mean, inevitably, there are folks joined with us today who've experienced the loss of a child. And first, I want to say I'm so sorry. If you're asking me to be the counselor, I will. And what I will do in this setting is actually not rush you to a 4-step process at all. I think this is really important. Seed is designed for renewing the mind when anxious thoughts come to the forefront of the mind. But in this specific case, I'm actually not going to go there at all for a while. Instead, what I want to do is validate the grief, walk you through the grieving of your loss. That's going to take time and the power of the Holy Spirit, because one of the things that happens specifically in the loss of a loved one or grief in any cases, and this is very normal to say, why in the world did this happen? Well, what I would gently do is walk you through realizing that why is not going to change the situation. What you're really after is the healing of a broken heart. And I want you to learn how to, and I want our friends hanging out with us to be able to come to the Lord in truth, homologeo, confession, the full truth. Where were you? It looks like you abandoned me. Now, I don't at all believe in the posture of approaching the Lord with pride or accusation, but it is to say that we must approach him in honesty. He knows the thoughts and intentions of our hearts. So if we're considering, where was he? Why did this happen? What in the world? More than the answers to those, we need the healing of a broken heart. We need to offer to him the very thing that we are nurturing, which is that brokenness. Mm-hmm. So it's part of the grief process is sitting in it. I often say this, more than platitudes, we need presence. You know, isn't it funny? I'm going to flip this and use this as an example. So you remember in the Gospels, Jesus hears about Lazarus. Lazarus had died. Jesus is the only one who could affect change in that situation. And yet he didn't preach a sermon about how all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. He wept. And I think a lot of us need to take that cue and actually attune to each other. And in this case, if I was the counselor, I would seek to attune to you, Sharon, as my client, and I would walk you very slowly through this. The goal of grief counseling is not to rush to an answer and check a box and move on with life, because moving on is not the goal. Moving forward is the goal. Yeah. You know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler, I think it's in their book on death and dying, say that we will never get over what happened to us, but we will move through it. Because grief changes us. And so as your counselor, I would want to help guide you through the process of how is this changing you? What needs to be vocalized? I'm not trying to avoid your interview question here, but SEED is not the approach I would take at all. SEED is a very valuable resource that I use in my life and I use with coaching clients, et cetera, and we can talk about SEED. But in this case, this is like we're going 6-7 feet below the surface, and SEED isn't the most valuable, appropriate resource at this stage. The mourning, the grieving is such a key point of this. You know, Kubler-Ross really developed the 5 stages of grieving, 5 stages of grief. And Kessler, her protege, developed what he calls the 6th stage of grief, which he calls meaning. And Sharon, that's going to take time. And so in no way do I want to avoid your initial question about SEED, but it is to say, let's get real with the folks joined with us to say, if you are facing loss of any kind, the last thing I'm going to do is give you a 5-step, 4-step checklist of things to do, because that's not going to touch the nerve of what's really ailing you. Now, this opens up the conversation around the broken spirit, which is the deepest part of who we are. We need to address that, because for many of us, like the children of Israel, we may have been delivered from Egypt, but Egypt doesn't get out of us. We're out of Egypt, but Egypt isn't out of us. We're out of pain, but pain isn't out of us. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We've got to, Sharon, this is why I don't believe in the long-term sustainable benefits of self-help. Because Jeremiah in chapter 2, verse 13 talks about broken cisterns, and there are broken cisterns walking throughout life today. Their names are Sharon and Chris and Bill and Bob, and we have these leaks in our soul, so to speak, and we need the power of the Holy Spirit to not bring answers to the cognitive dissonance, but instead bring healing to a broken heart. This is the premise of my book, Healing What You Can't Erase, because we all face circumstances in life that will never be erased from our stories. So the goal isn't to move on. The goal of grief counseling isn't to move on. It's to move forward so that we live not from an open wound, but from a scar. It's a big question. So I didn't at all answer your question about SEED, and we can get there. But I needed to address this honestly, Sharon, because if we're going to help people heal, we need to go to the deepest place of who we are first.
Actually, I think you answered it exactly the
Wow.
right way, because it goes right back, and you touched on it, to the self-help, you know, 10 steps to a happy marriage, or
Yeah,
those
yeah,
kinds of things. It's going right back to it. And I do believe there are broken people who are listening or watching, and they
yeah.
need to know that this conversation is in the context of understanding that there are all different levels of sorrow and grief. And so what your premise is not, if you follow these steps, then you know that's what's going to make you better, like you said, get you through it. That's not what you're saying. So
Yeah, the goal's not to get over anything.
not to get over it. Yeah, not to get over it. I mean, and if somebody had said that to me early on in my own grief journey, that would be the last thing they would say to me, because I would know that's impossible. That's an impossible thing.
And right there, Sharon, if I can flip the mic a little bit and get into interviewer mode, that would have been unhelpful for you, because it would have actually sunken you deeper
Yeah.
into the place of despair and pain you were in, right?
Yes, exactly.
When you lost your
Exactly.
son, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I will say, in time, and it took me a long time. I was, I'm a pastor's wife, teach Bible studies, the whole deal. But my struggle was wrestling with the Lord. I felt like He gave me the gift of wrestling. I didn't think it was a gift at first, but
Yeah.
I was wrestling to reconcile His love with His sovereignty, because I believe in both. And so I think that's one reason I was attracted to what you're saying about, one of the things that you say is taking the root of the anxiety or the depression and holding it into the light, because so often it's rooted in untruth. So we need to hold it into the light of
Right.
truth. And
Right.
for me, that was the key. The scriptures, to me, were the only unchanging factor in my life. I chose to believe they would never change. And that was where I was going to find that pathway. So that is that. So talk to us a little bit about that, about how part of finding that, you say it so much better than me, but how looking at what is it that is at the root of my anxiety and holding it up to the light of truth.
I'll get there in a second, but I
Okay.
need to sidestep us for a second, because one of the things that folks joined with us might be asking is, I'm actually, if I'm honest, Chris, Sharon, I'm struggling with my ability to engage with this truth in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
because He says He's good and what I'm experiencing isn't good. And how could He have let this happen? So I think we need to actually talk about that first, because with no disrespect to anyone, I think we so easily sweep the sovereignty of God conversation into play without fully understanding His nature. And then we unintentionally ascribe to Him things He didn't author. In other words, why did this happen? Why did the losses of my life happen? Why did the losses of your husbands in your life happen, Sharon? I think one of the most unhelpful things, oh goodness, I want to be careful about this. One of the most unhelpful things we say to people is, well, it must have just been God's will, and we have to trust in God's will. And I'm like, no, that is incongruent with the scriptures. I think the best answer is, I don't know. I don't know. We live in a fallen, broken world that's awaiting redemption. We serve a redeemer and a restorer. Why does it happen? I don't know. But we have to get so close to His heart that we don't unintentionally ascribe to Him authorship of things that He didn't author. We have to get so close to His heart to make sure that we don't mistakenly label His working all things together for good in a situation as His authorship of the situation. That's a way better way of saying what I attempted to say in the moment. So why does it happen? I don't know. But when we resolve the fact that we are not going to create an experience-based theology, where we're not going to sacrifice the truth of what we read in the Word upon the altar of human reasoning just to make up an answer that makes us feel good.
Yeah.
I think that's a starting place. That foundational theology, that he is eternally good, that his word is true, that we will live life with unanswered questions, is really foundational for us to be able to engage on the second half of your question. Does that make sense?
Absolute total sense.
It's not easy, because it's easier to say, well, it obviously was God's will. Like someone literally said to me in the last month, oh my gosh, do you see now, maybe, or do you have a glimpse of why, he allowed your mom to have cancer and die and you to have MS because you have this great book? And I'm going, oh, no. This is his working all things together for good. This is not his authorship. He is not the author of sickness and disease and poverty and lack. His ways are congruent with his nature, and it's not in his nature. So we've got to get to know his heart. Now, the second part of your question, allow me to address that. So once we establish clarity, better word. Once we establish our foundation upon what the word says about who he is, his self-revelation through scripture, then I think we can approach these questions about, what do I do about this? With open-handedness, with a level of curiosity. The goal of our faith experience isn't certainty. Faith requires mystery, so that's a huge part of it too. So what I'd love, if you would, Sharon, just ask me the second part of your question once again, because I want to drill down on that and answer specifically. But I apologize for the rabbit trail. It was important for me to establish that, because what I don't want people listening to do is go, I'm so confused about him then still.
Yeah. These are hard and deep questions that we really, and suffering confronts us with them. Our own suffering, the suffering of others.
So hard, Sharon.
I remember my husband read, he was struggling with his faith after we lost Mark, and he read Dobson's book, When God Doesn't Make Sense, because he thought, okay, he's going to tell me what, when God doesn't make sense, here's the answer. Yeah. He got to the last chapter, and Dobson says, sometimes God doesn't make sense.
Right.
That's just the way it is. And so, like you said, faith is mysterious, and
it requires mystery, Sharon.
It requires it. And but I am with you 100% on what does the scripture say about God's character and his love and all of that. And it's hard to put the pieces together, but he calls us to himself, and lament is good, and he welcomes our questions.
He does. He does.
Yeah.
He's a good father. Yeah.
I know our time is growing short, and we've been kind of all over the place.
That's
and I'm
great.
hoping those of you who are listening are saying, man, I got to get this book, Healing What You Can't Erase. And Christopher, I'd love for you to tell us about, how do you see this book being used? I know it's for single people, readers, individual readers, but I could see it being used as a small group study.
Yeah.
What do you have in mind for it? What have you heard from others?
All of the above. It's great for both individual application, but every chapter ends with a series of guided questions, guided exercises, a posture by which we can establish our heart before the Lord. Because what I do know, Sharon, is that information alone will not change our lives. It's only when we apply the information over time by the power of the Holy Spirit that transformation takes place. This is sort of the meta narrative of all of my work. And it is this, that transformation does not happen in one day. It happens daily. Mm-hmm. So my prayer is that this book becomes a resource for people to return to over time, because the answers, the guided questions, the exercises will be fresh for the season in which they find themselves. And so, yes, to answer your question, individual, small group, churches, grief share, I will say this, and I'm not trying to sell books here, but if folks listening do have small groups or a local church that they want to equip with this, they can go to healingwhatyoucan'terase.com And right on the website there, the book specific website, not only can they buy an individual copy of the book, but my publisher, my team has put together this incredible resource for bulk purchases. And so anywhere from 25 copies to 100,000 copies, they can get a bulk discount. So they can purchase for their small group or whatever, and then resell the book if they want. But that's all available at healingwhatyoucan'terase.com.
And I've also heard through the grapevine that there are some churches that are buying it for all of their leadership, and also that you are prayerfully working on videos and a study guide. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's all in beta right now, so there's not a ton to reveal about that yet, but one of the things, as I shared with you before we hit record here today, is that, again, I want this book to have a long tail because, like transformation, it takes time. And so my hope is to develop some small group curriculum out of it, some online courses. But I want people to get free and stay free. Again, this isn't just about a good idea and passing along information for me. This is about the fact that I want people to experience transformation, spirit, soul, body, and I want to be their virtual guide through the process because I believe that everyone can experience a measure of transformation in this life. Transformation, as I said, is not a one-day experience, an in-a-day experience. It happens throughout the course of our lives. I will continue to be transformed as I avail my heart to the Lord until I go to meet him in eternity. And so will you. So will all of our friends.
Well, Christopher, I was going to ask you to speak to that one person who is hanging on to life by their fingernails, but I think you just did. And you offered us a lot of hope through the power of the gospel. I appreciate so much the time that we've had with you. Certainly. And Christopher Cook has been our guest on the Help and Hope podcast, and he has written a book, Healing What You Can't Erase. He is the host of WinToday podcast, where he talks a lot about mental health. We're going to have all this information in the show notes on the website, so make sure you check him out. But the first thing you can do is just go and get the book. I know that our conversation, we still didn't unpack seed. So you have to get the book so that you can unpack that and see the great truth that he has there. Very encouraging. So again, I'm Sharon Betters, the Help and Hope podcast. We're so grateful to you, Christopher, for giving up your time, to sharing your time and your passion for those who are hurting, and giving us hope through a relationship with Jesus Christ and through the scriptures. Please visit helpandhopenow.org, where you're going to find many, many more free resources, stories like this, interviews like conversations like this, that are going to help turn your heart toward Jesus. Thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to being with you again.